The one time I did get summoned for jury duty and I got called in, had my backpack with me with like my laptop so I could do some work. And then I had to go through the metal detector and they scan my bag and they keep my bag. And they're like, we see scissors in your bag. We need you to empty your bag out right now. And I'm like, scissors? And like, I'm thinking I left like arts and crafts scissors because I do get crafty sometimes. I was like, what the fuck did I put in my bag? And I'm unloading my bag and I don't see what they're looking at. And then I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. They're like, we see something in your bag. You got to empty it now. And I was freaking out. I was like, am I about to get arrested? What's going on? And then I pull out a bag of autopsy tools that I left in my freaking backpack. They were clean because they were a gift from a doctor. I put them in my backpack because I wanted to bring them home before I used them to show my fiance Costa. Be like, look at this cool thing I got. And I totally forgot they were in my backpack. Mm-hmm. And so I had scissors, forceps, and a freaking scalpel in my bag.
And the security guards are like, wow, she's going to tear this place apart.
And the scalpel didn't have a blade on it. It was just the scalpel handle. But it looked weird when I pulled it out. And I was just like, oh my God. And I immediately dropped it. And I put my hands up. I was like, I'm so sorry. I work at the coroner's office in the other county. One guy found it hilarious. And then there was one woman who was not having it, which I do not blame her at all.
She's just doing her job. And she's like, I'm here to enforce this.
Thank God I had my work badge on me.
Have you ever wondered what it's like to perform an autopsy?
Ever wanted to know how accurate your favorite crime drama is?
If you're brave enough,
join us inside the morgue.
Happy 100th episode!
It's our 100th episode! Thanks for listening to us for 100 episodes. That's crazy.
I never thought this would actually like become a thing. We would actually have a podcast because this was just, well, when we first talked about it, I was like, oh, it's just an idea. We're never going to actually go through with it. And here we are.
You're the one who like really followed through with the idea though. I was like, I said it and it was like, oh, this is a cute idea. And then I got home and you would like send me like notes. You're like, hey, let's talk about this.
Let's do all of this stuff.
Oh, we're doing this. Okay, let's go.
Well, hey guys, welcome to Inside the Morgue. We're your hosts and pathology duo, Jess and Alice, and we're coming at you live or recorded from Young Chunk Studios here in Manayunk. We're not live.
Love that. We should do a live episode one of these days, though.
We should. That would be so much fun. Yeah. But we're celebrating our 100th episode, so if you've been here from the beginning, thank you guys so much for all your support. We love you guys.
Mm-hmm. And if you're not from the beginning, thanks for tuning in anyway. Mm-hmm. And check out our other 99 episodes. Yeah.
We thought we would do something really fun and special and kind of just make it a little bit of a longer episode. So we watched the new-ish movie that's on Hulu right now. It's called Anatomy of a Fall. It talks a lot about blood spatter. We have some really good court scenes. There's a morgue scene in the very beginning, which is really cool. So before we get into that, Dylan, where can the people find you if they want to start a podcast?
You can find me at my email, dylan@youngchunk.com. Send me all of your questions and needs and desires for podcast needs, and I will do my best to fulfill them.
Yeah, podcast needs. Don't be weird.
Yeah, don't be weird.
I'm looking at you.
Yeah.
All right, let's get started.
Are we ready to get into it? For the 100th
For
time?
the 100th time, let's get into it.
Let's get into it. I can't believe you've wanted to talk to me on a podcast 100 times.
I want to talk to you every day at work. So what's the difference?
In front of a microphone. All right. So this movie opens up with, there's a lot of drama, but there is a child who is blind, and he's on a walk with his dog while his mom is inside the house and his dad is there too. And on the walk, when he's coming back, the son finds his dad outside on the ground. There's a lot of blood under his head. He can't see it, but he like feels his chest and he like leans in to check, and he sees he's not breathing, and he screams for his mom to come out. His mom calls the police and an ambulance. But then we cut to an autopsy scene, and we will give a green flag for them taking pictures. And I mean, we love our photography. If you've been here for 100 episodes, we're into
it's our favorite thing.
we love our photography. And you actually see them roll the body on its side to take pictures of the back. So we're going to give another green flag for that too. Because they never really show that.
They always just show like the overall pictures and like if they're taking a picture of an injury, but they never see them actually rolling the body to take pictures of the back, which is also something that needs to be documented.
Yeah. And we do that for every case. We roll the body on one of its sides to see if there's anything abnormal on the back, take all of our photos on the back, and then we put the body on a block so that we can access the chest a little bit easier. And sometimes, depending on the case, we'll roll it on one side and then the other side just to make sure there's nothing hidden at all.
Especially like homicide cases, if there's like a bullet wound that we need to see better.
Yeah, or any kind of like bruising, or even like a tattoo is something like if you can only see it partially if you like roll them up on their left side, but let's say like on their left rib or something, they have a tattoo that you can't really see. You're gonna have to roll them on their right side so you can get a better picture of it because we document everything. And guess what? Everybody had PPE on.
PPE.
We love PPE. So the doctor there is dictating his findings, and he has one of his assistants writing them down. He goes on to say, the parallel superficial abrasions on the hands and forearms suggest the body slid 1 to 2 meters upon impact before reaching its final supine position. So supine is like laying on your back. Yeah. And prone would be if you were laying on your stomach. A left temporal hematoma related to the fatal brain trauma indicates collusion with a blunt object in the environment or a violent blow to the head. So not very specific. It could have been a few things that caused like the blunt head injury. It could have been either he fell or he was struck. Injury location is consistent with discovery position, meaning that impact occurred before the body hit the ground. In conclusion, they're not able to determine if the injury is the result of a collision or a fatal blow. And they can't rule out a third-party involvement. So the cause of death is head trauma, either accidental or deliberate. And they're waiting on tox results to help determine if they can tell if it was either he fell off the roof while he was working in the attic or he was pushed or struck on the head and then fell. And just a side note, the like special effects, practical effects makeup on the head wound actually looked really good.
It looked super realistic.
Yeah. And we'll give another flag or green flag for them using an L ruler to take the photos just so we can get measurements on both sides of the injury.
That's 3 green flags already.
3 green flags in the first.
It's like the
2
first
minutes.
Maybe like 5 minutes, right?
And it's like not even an autopsy scene. It's just vaguely in a morgue, but they did everything correctly. And I just want to say one of the reasons we're giving a green flag to the head wound. So there's a difference between a laceration and a cut. So like a laceration from a blunt object, you're going to have what's called like tissue bridging. So the skin won't neatly be sliced, kind of. It's just you're still going to maybe see like up close, like had the tissue kind of pulled apart with the impact of the blunt object, whereas a cut is with something sharp. So you're going to see like a nice, clean slice.
Yeah, clean edges.
Yeah, so this kind of had the more jagged edges and like the tissue bridging that you'd see in an actual blunt impact injury. So it was pretty impressive.
It's really good.
Yeah.
So on the day that this man died, the mom, her name is Sandra, she was with a student and she was interviewing her in the middle of this interview. Her husband, the man, his name is Samuel. He started playing music really loudly upstairs to kind of piss his wife off.
The song was PIMP, instrumental version. Really, really loud.
Like on repeat, too.
On repeat, yeah.
And he was doing this to like piss his wife off and to make the student leave. So she put an end to the interview and the student left. And then Sandra went upstairs to her room. And that's where she saw her 11-year-old blind son. His name is Daniel. He was going to go walk their dog.
Their dog's name is Snoop.
He was so cute. He was the goodest dog.
Yeah.
So Samuel, he comes down to talk to Sandra about what they were going to do about the day. And then he went back upstairs to work in the attic. And she went back to her bedroom to like go on her computer and do some work herself. And about 10 minutes later, she took a nap with some headphones and she fell asleep with the headphones in. And then an hour later after that, she heard Daniel scream. And then she found him as well. And they called EMS, who they arrived about 30 minutes later. So it appears that Samuel was working in the attic and he was close to the window leading outside, and the window was open that day of the fall. There's like an old lawyer friend that then comes into the house, and he's like trying to make sense of everything, talking to Sandra. And And he was like, the autopsy report is inconclusive with the cause of death because they're just not sure about exactly what happened. There's not enough concrete evidence to fully like determine that it was either he fell or somebody hit him.
Right.
But what they can defend is that Samuel, so right underneath of the window in the attic, there was a shed below. So they can determine that he bounced off of the shed's roof. Maybe he had hit his head on the edge there. And then it's possible, so he landed on the ground somewhat close to the shed. He could have found the strength to crawl 1 or 2 meters away before collapsing in that final position that Daniel found him in. And then that would also explain all of the blood in the snow. But of course, there's also several problems with this theory that they come up with. So there was nothing found on the roof, no DNA or anything. And there's these 3 very specific blood spatters on the front side of the shed, and that doesn't really match with the head impact on the roof. So then we cut to the court scene, and a blood spatter analysis, they need to make sense of this. And that's kind of really all they have to go off of is like the testimony of the blood spatter analysis. Yeah. So there's some bruising on the mom's arm, and to everybody else, that kind of looks like she was in a fight or a struggle of some sort.
Yeah, it's like on her forearm.
But she's like, no, I hit my arm on like the edge of the island sometime. It's from that. There wasn't a fight. And the lawyer kind of explains that to the court too.
Yeah, and so forearms is a common place to see like defensive injuries. I think we've talked about this before because like a lot of times if somebody's getting struck in the face, they'll like put their arms up to cover their face.
Just instinctively.
But also she does like walk by the island and it's like exactly the level of the bruise. So it could be either. I just immediately thought of how I always bump my hip on autopsy tables when I like turn the corner too fast. I have bruised my hip so many times.
There's
metal
constantly like
tables.
Small bruises on my hips, and I'm like, oh, I must have walked into a table and not even known it.
How do you not even know it? I always feel like I'm gonna die. I hit my hip on a metal table, and I'm like, I have to try not to like scream. I'm like, oh my god.
If I'm pulling, because I'll loadox all the bodies in the morning. If I'm pulling a body over on the loadox, like I have my hip on the table to like brace myself.
Yeah,
and I feel like that's how I get a lot of my bruises.
Yeah. Well, you've also done gymnastics before, and you like.
Yeah, the bar really bruises your hips.
Maybe you're just tougher than I am about that. I'm so dramatic about it. I'm like, oh my God.
I'm dying. I'm gonna die. This is the end. We're gonna wither away.
The metal autopsy table takes me out. Oh my God. Have you ever run over your foot when you're pulling? Okay, good. I'm
That's so unpleasant.
Because I feel so stupid every time I do it when I'm like pulling the body and I run over my toes and I'm like, oh my God.
And it's in front of somebody and you're like, no, I can't.
It's always in front of somebody. And it's like either an intern or a funeral home. And I'm like,
nothing happened.
Pretend you didn't and sometimes it's like obvious that like I ran over somebody and they're like, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, why? It's like, are you okay? I'm like turning red. They're like, you clearly just ran over
Tears
your
in your eyes.
What are you talking about? Everything's fine. My foot's starting to swell. So moral of the story, either thing could have happened. It could have been a fight or she could have bumped into something. So an accidental death is going to be hard to defend in court given the height of the windowsill on, I think it's like 2 floors up from where the shed is. And that's why there's an investigation for a suspicious death. And Sandra is the prime suspect because she was the only one there. And she's also the wife. And again, we've talked about it before. People are more likely to be killed by people they know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 90% of the time, it's always the spouse.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's possible that it could have been a suicide. There may have been an attempt in the past with him taking too many pills. Sandra doesn't remember it right away, but she remembers later. She's like, there was a time when he was really sick and like he threw up on the floor and there was what I didn't realize at the time, but were pill fragments in there. And I found like empty pill packets in the trash. So I think he was attempting and like, but after he had like felt better, I tried to talk to him about it. He wouldn't talk to me about it. So I don't know for sure, but it seems like it was a prior suicide attempt. And that is something that you ask in a death investigation. No matter
any suicidal ideations.
Yeah, even if it's like no suspicion, I always ask, I'm like, is there any history of prior suicidal ideations? Just
that question is actually like when we take death reports, it's on our report form to ask.
A questionnaire, yeah. So fast forward to the next day, they're trying to recreate the scene with Samuel and Sandra talking upstairs and Daniel outside. So to see if he actually heard the conversation and with like the loud music playing. And they're trying to prove that the parents could have been fighting because they would have had to be talking very loudly over this music for Daniel to be able to hear from outside. Yeah, they're trying to prove that he could, because Daniel's claiming that his parents were talking
Mm-hmm.
and they weren't arguing.
Yeah.
And he heard them talking, and the prosecution was like, well, if the music was playing really loud, they would have had to been talking loudly for you to hear them.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have Sandra in there with an officer recreating like what she had said they had been saying,
Mm-hmm.
like a script basically. But she doesn't want to scream loudly because she's like, this isn't what happened. I wasn't yelling. And so they bring in another officer, a female officer, to take her role. And they like
Mhm.
progressively get louder each time until
And Daniel's like, I
I
can't,
can't hear
anything.
anything. Yeah.
I think the movie did really well in kind of recreating the reenactments that like actually happened
Yeah.
during an investigation
Yeah.
of a suspicious death.
Yeah, they definitely happen. And so yeah, after this, Daniel wasn't able to hear them unless they were actually talking very loudly, almost yelling. But 3 days later, they indicted Sandra, and the investigation is officially underway. According to the blood spatter analysis, it indicated that Samuel may have received a blunt force blow to the head when he was on the third floor balcony. In addition, the reenactment they did brought to light a number of discrepancies with Sandra's story. And lastly, there was a file discovered on a USB belonging to Samuel, and it's an audio recording of him and Sandra the day of his death.
Mm-hmm. I also just want to point out when they did the reenactment of like him falling from the attic, they did it with like one of those just like flower dummies.
Yeah.
And you can see like somebody like pushed it out the window and like making it seem like he fell or jumped himself.
Yeah.
And it fell onto the shed and it bounced off and onto the snow covered ground there.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really cool to see because I feel like a lot of these shows don't show the investigation that goes through it, like
Yeah.
goes on in like these types of investigations. It's
yeah.
just like the court and then, okay, we're interviewing this person, but they don't show like all of that background.
Yeah. How sometimes you have to go back to the scene and look for more evidence. And
Mhm.
look for. Sometimes you do have to go back and do recreations of like reenactments of things just to get a better idea of what actually happened if you
Yeah.
weren't there.
We do that in like infant and pediatric deaths.
Yeah.
We'll go back and kind of recreate the scene with the parents and like so we can get a better idea of like their side and like what was the position, what did they find the infant or the
Mhm.
pediatric death, like
Yeah.
how did it happen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does happen. So yeah, that was a really interesting part to see, and like you see it from like Sandra's point of view. She's out
Yeah.
for a walk with Daniel because like they had to get out of the house for this part, and like you see her like on top of a hill, like seeing them push like a dummy
Mm-hmm.
out the window. Yeah.
So on this USB that they found, it's a recording of them having a fight of I don't know if it's like the day of or if it's the day before. I think it's
Oh, I
the
may
day
have gotten that wrong.
before.
I think I think you're right. I don't think it was the day of.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So it's the day before his accident. He had been recording Sandra and him fighting or just recording in general. And Sandra didn't know that she was being recorded.
I would be so upset.
I would lose all trust if I didn't know I was being recorded and I
Yeah.
was.
Do you know you're being recorded right now?
Yeah, this is fine.
Okay, good.
If I just find like little microphones all over my house and be like, what am I living in?
I'd leave immediately. Yeah.
So she's been now released on bail, and that stirred up a lot with the case because the press is saying that she's a flight risk, and she's now being reunited with her only witness, who is her son,
Mm-hmm.
and she could have some persuasion over him because they live in the same house.
Yeah, and I think like part of the reason she was able to be released on bail is because she has a young son, and now she's the sole
Who's impaired.
yeah, who's blind and like she's
the sole caretaker.
the sole caregiver now. But yeah, that was an interesting interesting conflict for them to go about in the movie. Like, oh well, if she did it, now she's reunited with the only witness, and she can like sway his opinion. And
So they kind of gave like a secondary caretaker to Daniel, who could kind of like keep an eye on him and like make sure that like mom and son aren't talking about the court case.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they said like they're not allowed to talk about
Mm-hmm.
the case when they're at home. And like this woman that they send with Daniel, like she like stays with them all the time.
Yeah, she was living in their house.
Yeah.
So like we said, the court had sent somebody to basically watch over Daniel, making sure that the mom and son like don't have too much interaction with talking about the court case.
Mhm.
And this woman's talking to Daniel, and she's doing a really good job of explaining why she's there.
Mhm.
Because he's 11. He might not really grasp this concept that's going on. And she's saying that the law can't be someone's friend, otherwise it couldn't be someone else's friend. Like, it has to kind of maintain that neutralness.
Yeah.
And the law has to be the same for everyone. And then in the next few scenes, we see the investigators doing another reenactment at the house. They're doing another like dummy drop.
Yeah.
And I think they also did a really good job. In like the next few scenes coming up, they have like a little diorama of the house. So like the jury can see for themselves, like
Mhm.
that, just like painting a better picture for the jury to like make their own judgments on.
What's the name of that forensic artist who made all the miniature dioramas of like
Oh, I'm gonna find it now.
famous
'cause
cases?
That was
'Cause that's
really
like
cool.
another one of my niche interests is like the dioramas that people make to recreate crime scenes. Like it's just so much attention to detail and putting everything down to scale. Like that's just such a talent, and I'm just so fascinated by it all. And there's a famous
I think it's called Death and Diorama.
is it Death and Diorama? Who's the artist?
Frances
Yeah.
Glessner Lee.
Yeah.
Glessner Lee.
Mhm. She did a ton of dioramas of different death investigation scenes, and you
Mhm.
can still see them. Like our boss
Yeah.
went to a conference somewhere, and it was in the same area where these are on
Mhm.
display, and he was able to go see them, and I was so jealous.
It's called Nutshell Stories of Unexplained Death.
Mhm. Should be a mini episode. We should talk about all those.
All right, stay tuned. That's going to be a mini. Yeah, she does a bunch of like exquisitely detailed miniature crime scenes to train homicide investigators to convict the guilty, clear the innocent, and find the truth in a nutshell.
I love that.
All
Just,
right,
like,
we're doing a mini on it.
yeah, we're doing a mini on that. So back in the movie, 1 year later, they're in the courtroom listening to the recording from the interview of around the time of the accident. And they have Daniel take the stand to talk about what happened during the reenactment and where he might have made a mistake. And in different parts of the house, his dad had put different pieces of tape, each with like different textures, so that Daniel would be able to tell where he was. And before the reenactment, Daniel had felt the tape that was on the shed, and he said he was right below the window. So like that's how he knew he was in the right spot. And then as the reenactment went on, he started to question himself and thought he may have actually been inside at that moment, which could very well be true. Emotional shock can definitely alter people's memories.
Mhm.
And that's been a more recurring thing, is like witness testimony isn't as accurate as people once thought it was, because
like you can't just rely on it because people can think they saw something, but they didn't see anything.
Yeah.
And like they literally believe that like, yes, I saw this when that didn't happen.
right, even to the point, and like we've probably talked about this, lie detector tests aren't always, like polygraph tests aren't always super accurate, because like if you truly believe that is what you saw or what you heard,
of course it's going to show that
like,
you're telling the truth.
It's going to show the truth. Or if you're just like a generally anxious person like me, your heart rate could be raised.
And then you think you're constantly lying when you're like, no, I'm just really stressed
if
out.
If somebody strapped me to a polygraph test, my heart rate would be through the roof, like with every question they asked me.
What's your name?
Oh my God, I don't know. I'd be freaking out. Yeah, so it can fluctuate a lot. And yeah, witness testimony isn't as always like accurate as they thought it would be. So next up, the blood spatter analyst testimony, and this is I believe the one for the defense.
Yeah.
So like the prosecution have their own blood spatter analyst, and then the defense, the lawyer friend, had said he knew a very good blood spatter analyst, so he brought her in to do her own analysis of what she thought happened. So there's a diagram of man and woman fighting on the third floor, and he goes up to say that the decisive element is that the 3 blood spatters in the shed, their shape is the typical spatter projected from high above. Oh, sorry, this is the prosecution's argument, is that the shape of the typical spatter projected from high above, they're long, narrow. And this is a green flag for showing the comparison of other types of spatter. There are different types of spatter. Did you have to do that class in grad school? Was yours all?
Mine was all online. I did a lab. I think it was an undergrad. We did a lab about like blood spatter, and like we had to like put the blood spatter on, and then we had to find the angle and whatnot. But I didn't do it in grad school because I was all online. I was a COVID grad.
When I took that class, it was like just coming out of COVID, so they were just starting to let us come back to campus, but we had to keep masks on and we had to sit like every other seat. But that was my favorite email that I ever got from school, because it was the teacher saying like, "Hey everybody, wear old clothes tomorrow. We're gonna be playing with blood spatter." And I was like, oh my God, what are we doing in class tomorrow? I was like, I was so excited.
You took, because my first year was your second year, so I missed it by 1 year.
Yep. Yeah. But it makes me feel better. We had to go back to online the next day because somebody in class got COVID. So
damn.
But I got to do the blood spatter in person. It was pretty cool. So yeah, we give a green flag for them showing comparison of different types of spatter. And according to their test, the spatter could only have landed there if Samuel was struck in the head from the 3rd floor balcony. They also have a 3D video example to help the jury understand this. And Samuel would have been like leaning away from the mic as I say that, leaning his head already quite far out when the blood was struck, this like where it made the spatter pattern. So he'd have to be like leaning over the balcony like that to make that spatter pattern. It's most likely that the combination of a violent blow and a deliberate push is what made Samuel fall, according to this analyst. We hear from another analyst later. Based on how tall the guardrail is and how tall and heavy Samuel is, it would have required a very deliberate push. The only thing they have to go off of is those 3 drops of blood, which is crazy.
Right.
Yeah.
That's just not enough evidence, I feel.
For blood spatter analysts. But it is like sometimes like the littlest things are great evidence, and like, but this is so hard. Blood spatter analyst is so hard because, as we see in a moment, like another analyst looks at the same exact thing and sees something entirely
has a whole
different
opinion. Yeah.
Everything else has to be speculated, and there's no murder weapon found on the premise to have caused this blow.
So it seems like Daniel has now some new information to offer to the court. So he's going to testify again in a few days, and he wants his mom to leave the house for the weekend so he can kind of be alone and like gather his thoughts before the testimony. And he had done an experiment in the house, and he fed his dog Snoop some aspirin, and he wanted to compare it.
Which is what they think the dad, Samuel, had like tried to OD on.
Yeah, that passed the previous suicide attempt that Sandra didn't think too much of at the time. He was comparing this experiment to that day because he thinks that Snoop had like licked up some of that vomit from the dad, and there was aspirin in the vomit. So he wanted to see if Snoop had the same reaction this time, which he did.
Yeah, because he remembered. He's like, I remember there was a time around then that like Snoop was really sick, and I couldn't remember like what happened to him, but he smelled like vomit and like
So they made Snoop throw up, and like he's okay. The dog is okay.
The dog does not die in this movie.
But now,
I was really nervous.
I was so sad at that part, but he's okay.
I was so scared.
But then, like, Daniel was like, oh, well, now all he wants to do is sleep and drink, which is exactly what happened in that first time. So Daniel now is under the impression that maybe his dad really did commit suicide. So he finishes his testimony, and he's giving some insight into why it's more likely that his dad had committed suicide. And at the end of that, we find that Sandra was acquitted at the end of the trial. But so that kind of like ends the movie. They also get into some other stuff about how like the blood spatter isn't that reliable, and you have to take into account that like snow melts. So some of the blood could have melted.
That's what I wanted to get into with the defense's blood spatter testimony. They bring in this woman who she has an entirely different story about how she thinks he fell off and how it would have been improbable for Sandra to be leaning so far over to hit him because then she could have fallen. And like, it's crazy. And she keeps saying it's improbable, and the prosecution keeps saying, but not impossible, because
he was so annoying.
Yeah. And he's
also, half of this movie was in French.
I know. So this movie was in French. So forgive us if we're leaving parts out, but it was so good. Highly recommend this movie. But yeah, the blood spatter analyst woman, she's like, it's so improbable that the prosecution is saying happened, it's more likely that he either jumped or
Mhm.
fell. And yeah, and again, they try to explain that there's no DNA on the roof. And she's like, well, it was snowy and snow can melt. So by the time
Right.
you went to go test it, the
There's
DNA
nothing
could
there.
have washed away. Like I can't explain why there is no DNA, but it could have just been like, there's a possibility.
Mhm.
And that's really part of like the defense's job isn't to entirely prove that somebody's innocent, but to like put the seed of reasonable doubt.
Mhm.
Like, because to convict somebody not guilty or to convict somebody to be guilty, you have to have beyond a reasonable doubt that they
Yeah.
are guilty. So once they plant a seed of doubt, you can't for sure say they're not guilty. That's why it's like guilty and not guilty and innocent. Because it's
Yeah.
like, you don't know for sure, but like, I don't know for sure they're guilty. So I can't
convict.
I
Yeah.
can't convict if like I have a doubt in my mind.
I really do wish that at the end, though, they showed a
They just
scene of
told
what
you.
happened.
Yeah.
And like you had this whole story the entire time. And then like, okay, that story didn't happen at all. And this actually happened. But
Mhm.
she's acquitted now. So trial's over.
Yeah.
They didn't show anything. So it's really just like all you have to go off of is either believing one side or the
Yeah.
other.
And then the recording of that Samuel took. So they're both writers. Sandra and Samuel are both writers. Sandra has a much more successful career than Samuel,
Mhm.
which it's implied that he's very bitter about. And Daniel, their son, became blind because of an accident that happened
Yeah.
when
The dad was late picking him up
Mhm.
and he was hit, I think, by a car
Yeah.
when they were crossing the street. And that might not have happened if his dad had picked him up on time. So he felt really guilty about that.
Yeah, and he thought Sandra resented him, and that's why he was the primary like stay-at-home parent,
Mhm.
and Sandra was more of the breadwinner. And the whole argument that they had was about him not having time to write, and Sandra saying like, it's not my fault. Like, you chose to be the primary caretaker and the
Mhm.
stay-at-home parent. Like, if you want to make time to write, make time to write. Like, do it. And
She's like, I'm not stopping you. Like, go ahead.
yeah, and like I could kind of see both sides of the argument when they were arguing.
Mhm. And then in court, they were trying to kind of twist it on her. And they were like, well, all of your books kind of take stories from your own life. So sure, you could have had all these thoughts. Maybe you even wanted to kill him. And like, that's what your one book was about, like killing the husband.
yeah.
And she was like, no, like, yeah, I take it like as inspiration, but it's
Yeah.
not like for fact, this is my life.
Right. And I liked the defense's argument was like, oh, so you do think Stephen King is a serial killer? If you're
Right.
going to think every writer who writes about murder is actually a murderer.
And she had taken an idea from Daniel with his permission.
Samuel.
Samuel, yeah. She took an idea from him for a book that he wrote a few pages on.
Yeah, she took like an
And-
excerpt from it. Yeah.
Yeah, and she wrote like a 300-page novel on it. And they-
Because he ditched the idea.
Yeah.
And
So she was like, hey, like, can I borrow this idea? I'm going to make it my own, but like, this is the foundation. And they were trying to turn it like, well,
You
he-
plagiarized.
you
Yeah.
plagiarized and now like he resented you and like wanted to get back at you for taking this idea and like being so successful with it. And she was like, no, like it's okay. It was like a mutual like, yes, you
Yeah.
can have it.
Yeah, and he had a therapist or a psychiatrist who had like prescribed him antidepressants and talked to him about he had been weaned off his antidepressants, and so the defense was trying to say like, okay, he was off his antidepressants, like maybe he had suicidal thoughts then, and then he jumped. And the psychiatrist is trying to say like, no, he always talked about how awful Sandra was and like how he resented her or how she resented him for what happened to Daniel and all this. And Sandra gets up and says is like, if I had a therapist, they could come in here and say how awful I thought Samuel was. Like, it's so one-sided, and it's just you don't know the relationship from this little moment in it. And the reason he was recording is because he is also a writer, and he would record bits of his life to draw inspiration.
Yeah.
So she wasn't happy about
I think
it.
in the beginning she knew that he was recording them and she knew that, but then he would just kind of do it spontaneously and she didn't know that certain moments were being recorded.
Yeah, so she's like, I knew he would record sometimes to get inspiration, and she thinks he picked a fight on purpose because he was recording and he wanted inspiration. And so she says that, and
Which is possible.
It's
probable.
possible.
It's not impossible.
Exactly. It's the doubt. It's a little bit of doubt where you don't know for certain exactly what happened. And what else was I gonna say? Oh, they bring up in the past after Daniel's accident, she had an affair. And they had kind of opened their relationship up after Daniel's incident. And
she's bi.
And she's also bisexual. And so they were trying to say that the day Samuel died, when she was being interviewed by the student, she was trying to seduce that woman.
Mm-hmm. And they kept saying, like, they asked the woman who was being interviewed, like, she was in court kind of testifying. And they were like, well, did you feel it, like, in a sexual way? Like, was she coming on to you? And she was like, it was just an interview.
It was just an interview. But then, like, but she was drinking wine. And it's like, okay. Like,
her ankles were showing.
How dare she? Yeah. And she, like, Sandra did, like, try to turn the conversation onto the interviewer and, like, ask her questions about herself. But it kind of seems like a natural flowing situation.
Yeah.
But it does seem like the prosecutor is trying to twist it. Like, oh, maybe Samuel was upset and, like, thinking you were going to have an affair again. So that's why he was playing the music really loud. And then you got mad and then you pushed him off the roof. And it's just
all that seed of doubt.
It's the little bit of doubt. Yeah. It was a really good movie that showed really good aspects of just, like, different forensic analysis and also courtroom like scenes and expert testimony and how
that whole dynamic works.
Two experts in the same field can have two entirely different opinions, and it's
all just trying to twist it so it fits, like, your narrative of what you're trying to make the jury think.
Yeah. I'm really glad I've never served on a jury.
I never want to. I'm never going to do jury. I'm never going to do jury duty
you live
because
in the county
I live in
we
the
work
county
in.
and I know all the detectives and I have access to cases.
They won't like that.
They're like, we don't want this girl. She knows too much.
I for sure thought I was going to get out of jury duty right away. It worked one time. Like, I was summoned and then I filled out the questionnaire online and they're like, never mind, we didn't want. Yes.
Did we ever talk about that?
We did a while ago. We can talk about it again. So I don't know if Dylan knows this. You can just tell it for Dylan.
Story time for Dylan.
The one time I did get summoned for jury duty and I got called in. I took the train into where I had to go. I had my backpack with me with, like, my laptop so I could do some work and my, like, books that I could read and everything. And then I had to go through the metal detector and they scan my bag and they keep my bag. And they're like, man, we need you to step to the side. And it's like 7:30 in the morning on, like, a Tuesday or something. And I'm like, oh my God, what's going on? And they're like, we see scissors in your bag. We need you to empty your bag out right now. And I'm like, scissors? And, like, I'm thinking I left, like arts and crafts scissors because I do get crafty sometimes. I was like, what the fuck did I put in my bag? And I'm unloading my bag and I don't see what they're looking at. And then I was like, I don't know. I know what you're talking about. They're like, we see something in your bag. You got to empty it now. And I was freaking out. I was like, am I about to get fucking arrested? What's going on? And then I pull out a bag of autopsy tools that I left in my freaking backpack. They were clean because they were a gift from a doctor that I work with. And the reason I had them in my backpack is because she had our names engraved on them.
And I thought it was such a sweet gift.
It was such a sweet gift.
I love my tools.
I put them in my backpack because I wanted to bring them home before I used them to show my fiance Costa. Be like, look at this cool thing I got. And I totally forgot they were in my backpack. And so I had scissors, forceps, and a freaking scalpel in my bag. The scalpel, it was just the
security
handle.
Guards are like, wow, she's going to tear this place apart.
And the scalpel didn't have a blade on it. It was just the scalpel handle. But it looked weird when I pulled it out. And I was just like, oh my God. And I immediately dropped it. And I put my hands up. I was like, I'm so sorry. I work at the coroner's office in the other county. And one guy found it hilarious. And then there was one woman who was not having it, which I do not blame her at all.
She's just doing her job, and she's like, I'm here to enforce this.
And I showed them thank God I had my work badge on me. I was like, look, I work for.
Imagine if you did it and they were like, we don't believe you. You're gonna have to come to jail.
You'd be my one phone call. I'd be like, Chance, you have to tell them.
I will never forget it. She texted me that morning and she's like, you're never gonna believe what happened. And she told me, and I was like, that's the most Alice thing I could think of.
You were the first person I texted. They had to take my tools away. Obviously, I can't walk into a government building with
scissors,
surgical tools, and. So, but the one guy who thought it was funny, he's like, hey, I'm covering the shift soon. When you're done, come find me and I'll give you your stuff back. And I was like, thank you.
What a nice guy.
He was so chill. He thought it was hilarious. And then I went to go pick up my tools later that day. I made it very far in the selection process. Like they almost picked me. I was so scared. Then they finally let me go and I went and I found the guy and I got my tools back and I was just talking to him about work and I was like, thank you so much for showing mercy
on a little girl.
That could have gone south so fast. But yeah, I went back and you were the first person I texted when I was like, oh my God, I'm such an idiot. I brought my tools to court.
I remember the one time I got summoned, it was the day before, and they were like, no, we don't want you. And I was like, thank God.
Never mind. Yeah, no, I was surprised by how far I made it in the selection pool. I thought I was going to get picked. I was there until like almost 3.
Yeah, you were there all day.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, are you still here? Like, are you home yet? And she's like, no, I'm still here.
Waiting.
I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
I was so scared I was going to get picked. Thank God I didn't. They were probably like, that's the girl who brought tools.
We don't want
surgical
her.
tools.
Do we think she's reliable? No.
She definitely doesn't have good judgment. Don't bring her in. Yeah. So that was my story of almost getting called for jury duty.
I love that story.
Don't walk into a government building with scissors.
Check your bag.
Check your bag.
For sharps, explosives.
Have you ever seen those like memes where it's like, I'm going through TSA and suddenly I'm like, do I have a gun on me? And it's like, I've never owned a gun. That's me now because I got
that all the time. He's like, did you take your TNT out of the bag?
That's me now every time I go through security. I'm like, do I accidentally have surgical tools in my bag again? No. I leave them at work now because I showed everybody I need to show my cool tools and now they've been used, so they stay at work. Yeah.
I think mine are in a bag in my trunk still.
Yeah. I actually think the first thing I said when I dropped the tools was like, they're clean, I swear.
With your hands up like they're arresting you.
Well, I didn't want them to think I had like dangerous tools and on top of that a biohazard. So I was like, I promise they're clean. That was a day. That was a fun day.
That was a great day. Great day for Alice.
Great day for me.
One with many.
Okay, so getting into blood spatter analysis, these experts will examine blood stains at crime scenes to learn about the direction and speed of the blood. We've talked about blood spatter analysis before because we've talked about Dexter at least twice. I also thought of Dexter in this episode because in season 4, when they're investigating the Trinity killer, Trinity makes like one of the kills he does is he makes women like jump off of a building. And so there's a part where they go to recreate the jump and they have a bunch of the dummies that are like the approximate weight of the victim and they like throw them off at different angles to see if it lands in the same way. So that's what I was thinking when they were doing the reenactment.
I also love when Dexter's in like the spatter room and he's like just smashing random things trying to figure out like, okay, this weapon kind of does this way and this weapon does it that way.
I just want to do that at work one day.
I just want to smash things.
Like, let's go to a rage room.
You ever been to one?
No, I haven't.
They're so much fun.
Have you been to one?
I took Dom to one for one of his birthdays.
Oh my God.
We threw plates all over the place.
Maybe we'll do that for my bachelorette party. We'll go to a rage room or something.
Rage room.
All right. We'll let you guys know if we end up doing it. We're going to come in with like bandages to be like, guys, we went to a rage room. There were some injuries.
Things happened.
So blood spatter analysis involves examining the number, size, shape, and distribution of blood stains. Also, it's blood spatter.
Not splatter.
There's no L. There's not blood splatter. It's spatter, which people think sounds weird, but I'm like, no, it's the right way to say it. So the amount of blood spatter and the pattern it forms depends on how much blood is available and how much force was used in the injury. So they also determine what direction the blood is going and at what speed. And lastly, they determine if a person or an object shielded an area from the blood. So that's like what would be called a void pattern. So there is a really good episode. I'm just going to talk about Dexter this whole episode. There was a really good episode of Dexter.
I'm obsessed. I'm on season 5.
Where he like, oh my God. Brutal. Where he gets like an approximate height of the killer because he's doing the blood spatter and he's like trying to recreate it and he's like, no, the spatter, like the void pattern doesn't look the same. And then he gets Deb to do it, who's approximately the same height,
who's shorter,
as the girlfriend that was saying that she didn't do it, and it ends up being like the same kind of pattern. So that's cool. So yeah, void patterns are interesting to like look at too. So there's 3 types of blood spatter: passive stains, transfer stains, and projected or impact stains. Passive is blood that falls freely due to gravity, And the flow on the surface then is based on gravity. So like the way it
Just naturally goes.
naturally falls. So if like it falls at an angle, it's just going to like slowly drip down. Impact is projected backward from the blood source or back spatter.
You see that a lot with like gunshot wounds.
Yes.
You'll see the back spatter on the hands.
Yes.
Which we'll photograph.
Yes. Yeah, we always do. That's why we always do in any case involving a gunshot wound, we'll photograph the hands, but especially if it is a homicide or a suicide, we'll do like, because it can help determine like what hand was used for the gun. If like somebody allegedly shot themselves, we need to make sure there's the back spatter on the correct hand. And like it can also help determine how close the gun was at the range. So we make sure we cover all our bases with that. And there can also be forward spatter, and this is the most common type of blood spatter at a crime scene. And transfer is also known as a swipe pattern, which is blood that is transferred onto a surface by a moving object.
So if like I feel like you always see that in movies, like where somebody's like bloody and they're running down a hallway and their like hand swipes against the wall, like that's a swipe pattern.
Just picturing somebody running down the halls with like bloody hands, just smearing it everywhere.
I feel like what am I thinking of? Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm just thinking of them running.
Oh my god, yes. They run slow in the movies
because they're slow, like they're in a dream.
They're in a dream, and you always run slow. And Jess and I had a whole thing. She's like, "Why does everybody run so slow in Nightmare on Elm Street?
Like they're not in danger.
Like they're being chased by Freddy Krueger, and they're running so slow." I was like, "I think it's because like they're in a dream." And like, have you ever tried like in your dream when you try to like run or like fight, and it's all like slow mo, and you feel weak? I'm like, yeah.
I don't remember too much of my dreams.
Really?
I used to dream a lot when I was a kid. Now, like, I feel like recently, like, it's rare that I have a dream.
Yeah. I haven't had a dream in a while, but like whenever I try, like if I'm ever having a nightmare and I'm trying to like fight somebody off, suddenly like my arms feel like jello when I'm like trying to like throw a punch or something, and like, or I'm trying to run away, like my limbs just turn into jello. Have you ever had, I'm sorry, I'm going on a tangent. It's 100 episodes. I'm going to do what I want.
Baby.
Have you ever had sleep
Go Birds.
Go anybody who is in the Chiefs. Have you ever had like a sleep paralysis situation?
Yes.
Oh my god, isn't it so scary?
Freaky.
It freaks
me out.
I had it
one night, especially like when you're laying on your back. I feel like you have it more.
Yeah.
I had it one night and like I was like twitching almost, and Dom woke me up, and then I started crying. I was like, I don't know why I'm crying though.
It's scary. I joke with Costa because there's been 2 times that I've had like sleep paralysis, and both times I thought Costa was in the room with me, so he jokes that he's my sleep paralysis demon.
Like, just at the end of your bed staring.
Because like there was one time I like dozed off on our couch, fell asleep, and I woke up and I couldn't move, and I thought I saw him like walking around, so I thought he was home. And then like I fully woke up and I went to look for him, and then like a few minutes later he walked in the door, and I was like, "Oh, where'd you go?" And he's like, "I'm coming home from work. What are you talking about?" I'm like, "You were just here before." And he's like, "Nope, I wasn't." And I was like,
"Oh, I'd be so freaked out."
I was freaked out. And then the other time it was a weekend, we were both home, and he was like playing video games in the other room, and I just went to go take a quick nap, and I dreamt that he was like poking me. And I couldn't move, and I was so annoyed. I'm like, "Why are you poking me?" And so I finally like moved my one arm to like kind of like push him away. And when I finally go to push him away, he like wasn't there. And I'm like, "What the hell just happened?" And I go into the other room, and Costa's playing his video game. And I'm like, were you just like messing with me in there? He's like, "I have no idea what you're talking about."
Oh my gosh. No, I haven't had to that extreme.
No, those are the only 2 like sleep paralysis situations I've had. So thankfully it wasn't like a scary demon. It was just Costa. I thought Costa was just annoying me. Nope. He was just innocently minding his own business.
Oh my goodness.
Sorry for the tangent. It's 100 episodes. We're gonna do what we want. It's gonna be random today.
So we've said this multiple times this episode, and we've probably said it before in a Dexter episode, but this blood spatter analysis is super controversial because it's very subjective, and there's a lot of potential for errors, and it can lead to a lot of wrongful convictions.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a huge lack of scientific rigor, and experts often lack the training that they need. And more often than not, analysts may reach different conclusions about the same pattern in front of them. So like we said earlier, like 3 different people can be looking at the same pattern and all have a different opinion on what they think it is.
Mm-hmm.
And BPA, or blood pattern analysis, have been used to convict innocent people. For example, a man named Joe Bryan was convicted of killing his wife based on BPA testimony. So getting into this true story, Mickey Bryan, a 4th grade teacher of Clifton, was found murdered in her home on October 15th, 1985. Her husband, Joe, a school principal, was attending an education conference about 120 miles away in Austin at the time of her death. Police initially investigated Mickey's death as a burglary resulting in homicide, and Mickey's brother, Charlie Blue, traveled to Clifton after her death and hired a private investigator. While in Clifton, Mr. Blue borrowed Joe's vehicle. 4 days after borrowing the vehicle, Mr. Blue told authorities that when he opened the trunk, he found a flashlight and what appeared to be small bloodstains on the lens. The specks on the flashlight lens were human blood, and it was type O negative blood, which is the same as Mickey's, and it's also the same as approximately 50% of the nation.
That's a common one, yeah.
Or population, really.
Mm-hmm.
And so in 1985, blood typing was the most precise tool that law enforcement had for such evidence.
Right.
And the crime lab chemists also found a few tiny plastic particles on the flashlight lens that they said appeared to have the same characteristics as fragments of birdshot shells that were also found at the crime scene.
Yeah, and I think that's something a lot of people don't realize now is, as far as scientific terms, DNA is very new.
Yeah.
Like 90s,
Mhm.
like very, very new. So when we're talking about something that happened in 85 and they're talking about only using the blood type,
That's all they had.
that's the strongest argument they had. They didn't have DNA testing back then, which is like crazy.
Forensics is a baby.
Yeah, forensics and DNA testing is very, very new in terms of science. Like, it's crazy to think about. And so despite being 120 miles away at the time of the crime and having no clear motive, Joe was arrested on October 23rd, 1985, 8 days after Mickey's death. Joe's trial took place in March of 1986, and in addition to the public prosecutor, a special prosecutor was hired by Charlie Blue, who's Mickey's brother. With no eyewitnesses who could place Joe Clifton at the time of the murder, no motive, no forensic evidence that conclusively tied him to the crime scene, the prosecution's case rested entirely and largely on the flashlight that they found. The bloodstain pattern analyst, whose work had since been debunked and retracted, proved testimony that linked the flashlight to the crime scene. And during the trial, a detective stated that Joe was the beneficiary of a $300,000 life insurance policy. And we talked about this before with like life insurance policies being motivation for like spouses to murder each other, but also like that's kind of like a de facto, like your next of kin is going to be the beneficiary.
Yeah.
So like it shouldn't immediately make somebody a suspect, but it can be a motive. Like don't don't let somebody sign like a huge life insurance policy on you, but like
sus.
This is one of those things where it could be like one way or the other. It's like it could be motive, but it also could just be that he's her husband and the next of kin who's going to have access to her life insurance policy.
Right.
Yeah. So Joe was convicted and sentenced to 99 years in prison. And in February 1988, Joe was released when a 3-judge panel concluded that the trial judge erred when he denied a defense request to reopen testimony late in the trial. The judge had prevented Joe's attorneys from reading a deposition with Brian's insurance agent, in which the agent refuted the claim that Mickey's death was worth over $300,000 to Joe. The actual value was less than half that amount. The ruling made no determination as to Joe's guilt or innocence. The Boston County DA's office retried Joe in June of 1989. The district attorney was again assisted by a special prosecutor, and they summoned largely the same witnesses who appeared at the first trial. The prosecution's explanation of the crime was that shortly after speaking with Mickey on the phone at 9:15 p.m., Joe slipped out of the hotel and drove 120 miles to Clifton through heavy rain, shot Mickey, with whom he had no history of conflict, got rid of the pistol and jewelry, but kept a flashlight speckled with blood in his trunk. And then he drove the 120 miles back to Austin and re-entered the hotel in time to clean up and attend the conference's morning session without leaving behind a single eyewitness. Again, this is based largely on the blood pattern analysis and plastic found on the flashlight. And Joe was found guilty and sentenced to 99 years.
So in 2016, IPTX, which is the Innocence Project of Texas, They filed a complaint with the Texas Forensic Science Commission, who reviewed the blood pattern analysis and testimony from 1985 and determined that it was absolutely unreliable. In 2018, they presented new evidence, including statements about a potential suspect and the Texas Forensic Science Commission's rulings, in an attempt to secure a new trial. The blood pattern analyst from Joe's trial submitted an affidavit stating, "Some of my techniques and methodology were incorrect. Therefore, some of my testimony was not correct. In no way did I lie in my report or testimony, as I was doing what I thought was correct as a result of my training at the time." So again, they don't always have this proper training, and it's really just based on their opinion.
Also, it was like we were just talking about how forensic science and DNA testing is relatively new. Like this is in the 80s.
It's constantly evolving now.
Yeah, this is in the 80s, and now this is 2016 when
they came up with all of these new techniques.
They might have learned from the error of their ways. Yeah.
So the court did not grant a new trial, and IPTX secured parole attorneys to assist with Joe's parole hearing in March of 2020. Numerous character witnesses, including author John Grissom, provided statements to the Board of Pardons and Paroles. Joe was granted parole and released on March 31st, more than 30 years after being wrongfully convicted for his wife's murder. In 2021, IPTX filed a petition with the Supreme Court to review Joe's case based on actual innocence. The Supreme Court declined to hear the case. All current legal avenues to prove Joe's innocence has been exhausted. So just to recap, he was charged for murder. He was convicted in 98, sentenced to 99 years, and he was finally released in 2020.
So this story came from the Innocence Project of Texas. IPTX is dedicated to correcting past injustices, preventing future wrongful convictions, and giving hope to people who feel like they're out of options. As a nonprofit organization, the Innocence Project relies on community support to free the innocent, reform criminal justice practices, and educate the public about wrongful convictions. Their mission is to restore, reconnect, defend, promote, and prevent. So go check out their page. It'll be linked in our show notes, and you can sign up to be an advocate, join their defense, or host a fundraiser or an event with them. And feel free to donate to this wonderful project. It's so important to help innocent people who've been wrongfully convicted.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, all of that is going to be linked in our show notes. Highly suggest checking them out. There's also probably a bunch of other innocence projects around if you want to find one that's local to you.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. They're all over. Yeah. They're a great resource for people who need more options. Yeah. So I think does that end our 100th episode?
I don't want to end it. There's so much.
Let's just keep going.
So much fun.
Let's just not end this episode ever. Well, thank you guys for listening to our 100th episode. I think we
tallied 4 green flags.
No red flags.
No red flags for Anatomy of a Fall.
Well, so in our terms, it's forensically accurate. But if you have different thoughts, let us know at Inside the Morgue Pod on Instagram. You can shoot us a DM or you can comment on our YouTube page.
If you guys have any show or movie suggestions that you want us to watch, DM us, email us.
Yeah.
Find us.
Our email's Inside the Morgue.
Inside the Morgue Pod.
Is it pod too?
I think it's also pod.
Okay. Inside the Morgue Pod at gmail.com. Yeah. So thanks for listening today and for the past 99 episodes. We're really excited to still be doing this and to be doing it with Young Junk now. And yeah, we hope to do 100 more at least. We'll see you next time for a brand new dissection.
Bye.
Bye.
Young Junk!